He didn't raise his voice. That was the worst part. Dominic Vescari simply set down his champagne glass, looked at his wife of 11 years across a ballroom filled with 300 of New York's most dangerous people, and said, "You're done here." No anger, no hesitation. The way a man sends back a dish he didn't order. And every captain, every underboss, every silk-suited killer in that room watched Naomi Hale Viscari's face go white and said nothing. Because when the king speaks, the court goes silent. What none of them saw was the woman standing at the top of the grand staircase, and what she was about to do would unravel everything. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this has traveled. Stay until the end. You won't regret it. The gala had cost $400,000 to stage, and it looked every cent of it. The Meridian Ballroom on the 42nd floor of the Caldwell Tower had been transformed over 3 days by a team of 60 event staff who understood, without being told explicitly, that this was not merely a charity function. This was a demonstration. The Viscari Family Charitable Foundation raised money for children's hospitals and inner-city arts programs and literacy initiatives, all of it real, all of it carefully audited. But the deeper purpose of an evening like this was to remind every family in the Northeastern Corridor that the Viscaris did not merely run organized crime in New York. They curated it. They elevated it. They made it beautiful enough that mayors shook their hands in public and federal prosecutors declined invitations to investigate because the paper trail led nowhere useful and the political cost of failure was too high. Naomi had planned this evening for 4 months. She had selected the florist, white ranunculus and silver eucalyptus, no roses, because roses were predictable, and predictability was a weakness she had been taught to avoid. She had negotiated with the caterer over the salmon preparation twice and the dessert presentation 3 times. She had personally reviewed the seating arrangement to ensure that Vincent Carano, who controlled the Brooklyn docks, was placed nowhere near Sal Mantovani, who had recently begun encroaching on Carano's import schedule in ways that could, if mishandled, become something that required bullets instead of conversation. She had coordinated security with Evelyn Viscari's personal head of detail, a man named Rourke, who had worked for the family since before Dominic took over, who trusted nobody but respected competence, and who had told Naomi 3 weeks ago, in his clipped and largely emotionless way, "You run a tighter operation than half the captains downstairs." She had taken that as the compliment she believed it was intended to be. None of it mattered now. She was standing near the East Bar, one hand loosely around a glass of sparkling water she hadn't touched, watching the room the way she always watched rooms, systematically, without appearing to. Checking temperatures, reading postures. 11 years of marriage to Dominic Vescari had turned what might have been natural social intelligence into something closer to a survival skill, and she deployed it constantly and quietly, the way the body deploys breath. She saw Sabrina Cross enter the ballroom at 8:47. Naomi knew the exact time because she had been standing near the doorway precisely to watch for arrivals that had not been on the guest list she approved. Sabrina was not on that list. Sabrina was never supposed to be in this building tonight. Dominic had been explicit about that 3 weeks ago, in one of their rare conversations that qualified as direct. The gala is business. Sabrina stays out of it. Naomi had accepted that with the same flat composure she accepted most things Dominic said, which was to say she noted it, filed it, and waited to see what it actually meant. What it apparently meant was nothing. Sabrina Cross was 31 years old and moved through a room the way a lit match moves through dry paper. She was wearing a backless scarlet gown that made the choice feel like a declaration rather than a fashion decision, and she walked with the specific confidence of a woman who understood that every man in the room was aware of her and considered that awareness her due. She was not subtle. She was not trying to be. Subtlety, Naomi had come to understand, was not Sabrina's instrument. Sabrina's instrument was pressure, direct, sustained, unapologetic, and she played it with considerable skill. Dominic met her near the center of the room. Naomi watched him do it, watched the shift in his posture, the way his shoulders loosened, the way the habitual tightness around his jaw, The tightness that was simply the baseline condition of being Dominic Viscari, eased by a fraction that only someone who had studied him as long as she had would detect. He kissed Sabrina's cheek. He handed her a glass of champagne. He did not look across the room toward his wife. Naomi set her sparkling water on the bar. She had two choices. She could retreat, find a conversation on the far side of the ballroom, position herself near Evelyn, let the evening continue without incident, and process whatever this was privately, later, in the way she had processed most of the difficult things about her marriage, which was to say alone and without allowing any of it to show. Or she could do what 11 years of accumulated silence had made almost instinctive, which was to walk toward the problem, assess it clearly, and manage it. She walked toward the problem. She got within 12 feet of Dominic before he turned and saw her, and in the half-second before his expression settled into Bashuit's public configuration, controlled, impassive, master of the room, she caught something that she catalogued and stored. Not guilt. Dominic Viscari did not feel guilt the way ordinary people felt it. What she caught was calculation. He was already deciding how this scene played. Naomi. He said her name like a period at the end of a sentence nobody asked him to write. I wasn't aware we'd adjusted the guest list, she said. Her voice was even. She had practiced even for a long time. I made a decision. Without mentioning it. I don't report to you on decisions. He picked up his glass. His eyes were already moving past her, scanning the room, doing the constant territorial surveillance that was as natural to him as breathing. Go handle the Carano table. Sal's wife is apparently upset about the seating. I'm talking to you. And I'm finished talking. He looked at her then, directly, with the full weight of whatever it was that lived behind his eyes when he wanted to end something. Go. She didn't move. It was a small refusal, barely perceptible to anyone watching from more than a few feet away. But they were not entirely alone. Marcus Webb, Dominic's consigliere, was standing 6 feet to the left with his attention carefully elsewhere, which meant it was entirely on them. Sal Mantovani's youngest son was drifting nearby. Two of the serving staff were close enough to have heard the exchange if they were listening, which they certainly were. Dominic's jaw tightened. Naomi. Her name again, lower this time, a register she knew. I organized this evening, she said, still quiet, still even, but not backing up. I'd like to understand why you invited someone I specifically wasn't told about. You want to have this conversation here. You started it here. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger exactly. Dominic's anger was cold and controlled and rarely visible, but something adjacent to it, something that had to do with being contradicted in front of witnesses by someone he had long since categorized as manageable. He set his glass down on a passing tray. Then he said, loud enough for Marcus to hear, loud enough for the Mantovani boy to hear, loud enough that the two servers paused almost imperceptibly in their movement. You're done here tonight, Naomi. Go home. She stared at him. I'm sorry? This is a business function. You've fulfilled your purpose. The room is set up. The arrangements are fine. You're not needed anymore. He reached out, not violently, and removed her hand from where it had been hovering near his arm. She hadn't realized she'd raised it. He handed it back to her as if returning something unwanted. Have the car brought around. The nearest conversations had gone quiet. Not all of them. The ballroom was large and loud, but the immediate radius had developed the specific silence of people pretending they weren't listening to something they would be repeating tomorrow. Naomi didn't move. She understood, with a clarity that was almost physical, that this was not about Sabrina Cross. Or rather, Sabrina was the occasion, but not the cause. What Dominic was doing was something he had been building toward for months, maybe longer. A renegotiation of terms, a public redefinition of what she was and was not in this ecosystem. And he was doing it here, in front of captains and consiglieri and business associates, because the audience was the point. Because if she left the room tonight under these circumstances, every person who witnessed it would update their understanding of the hierarchy accordingly, and that updated understanding would be very difficult to reverse. She knew this. She had known, in some structural, bone-deep way, that something like this was coming. She just hadn't anticipated that it would happen in the Meridian Ballroom at a $400,000 charity gala that she had personally spent 4 months organizing. "Dominic," she said, "I'm not going to say it again." "I know." She didn't finish the thought. Whatever she might have said next, and she wasn't certain in that moment what it would have been, was preempted by the arrival of Sabrina Cross at Dominic's left side. She arrived the way she did most things, smoothly and without apparent awareness that her timing was causing any disruption, though Naomi had ceased believing in Sabrina's obliviousness approximately 2 minutes after first meeting her. "Dom." Sabrina touched his arm lightly. Then she looked at Naomi with an expression so precisely calibrated between sympathy and dismissal that it must have required practice. "I'm sorry. Am I interrupting?" "No," Dominic said. Naomi looked at Sabrina Cross for a long moment. Then she looked back at her husband. The silence between them was 3 seconds long and contained approximately 11 years of marriage. Then Naomi turned and walked toward the east exit. She kept her spine straight and her pace unhurried. She did not look at the faces that turned in her direction as she passed. She did not look at Marcus Webb, who was watching her go with an expression she would have liked to read. She did not look at Vincent Carano, who had been positioned near enough to have seen everything and who was, she knew, cataloging this evening with the same precision she had spent years applying to everything in this world. She reached the edge of the ballroom. The east corridor was quieter. There were staff along the walls and a pair of security men near the elevator banks who straightened when they saw her coming and then didn't know quite what to do with themselves, because the instructions they had received tonight were presumably that Mrs. Vescari was to be given full access to everything, and those instructions now existed in an ambiguous relationship with what had apparently just happened 30 feet away. Naomi stopped walking. She stood in the corridor with her hands at her sides and her breathing measured in the full, terrible clarity of what had just occurred settling over her the way cold water settles, not suddenly, but completely. He had done it publicly. He had stripped her of her position, her function, her standing in the room she had built, in front of the people whose opinions defined the family's internal power structure. And he had done it with all the effect of a man adjusting a seating chart. And Sabrina had been there to witness it, had been there to receive the space that Naomi vacated. That was the architecture of it. That was what tonight had actually been for. She became aware then that she wasn't alone in the corridor. She turned. Evelyn Vescari was standing 12 feet behind her. Dominic's mother was 71 years old and had been formidable for all of them. She was the kind of woman whose appearance suggested contained power rather than obvious authority. Medium height, silver-haired, always dressed simply but precisely, the kind of precise that communicated that she had long since moved past needing to try. She had run the family's finances through 2 federal investigations and 1 internal coup attempt, had navigated 3 decades of Mafia politics in New York without ever becoming the visible target she might easily have been, and had produced and shaped and endured Dominic Vescari, which was in itself a form of combat. She was holding a champagne glass she hadn't touched. She had apparently been at the top of the east staircase. She had apparently seen everything. Naomi waited. She didn't know what she was waiting for. She didn't know what was possible anymore. Evelyn walked toward her. She did not hurry. She moved with the unhurried deliberateness of a woman who understood that the pace at which she chose to arrive was itself a statement. She stopped in front of Naomi and looked at her the way she sometimes did, with that specific quality of attention that Naomi had learned over years was not sentiment. Evelyn Vescari did not traffic in sentiment. What she trafficked in was assessment, and she assessed with extraordinary accuracy. "Come," she said. "I'm fine," Naomi said. "I know you are." Evelyn took her arm, not taking her hand the way a comforter would, but taking her arm, the way a woman takes the arm of someone she intends to walk beside. "Come anyway." Naomi let herself be turned. They walked back toward the ballroom entrance together. Not the exit. The entrance. Naomi became aware of this slowly, and then all at once. "Evelyn, don't talk." They came through the entrance. The ballroom spread out in front of them, and from the doorway, which opened onto a small elevated landing 2 steps above the main floor, designed to give guests a moment of orientation before descending, the full room was visible. 300 people, 40 tables, the Carano family near the north windows, the Mantovani contingent to the west, Marcus Webb now speaking to someone near the bar, Dominic near the center of the room, Sabrina at his side, already receiving the attentions of a cluster of captains who had apparently decided, with the flexible loyalty of people who needed to be on the right side, that acknowledging Sabrina Cross was a reasonable evening investment. Every person near the entrance saw them. Then the nearby conversations faltered, and the people who noticed that nearby conversations had faltered turned to see why. And within 45 seconds, the awareness had traveled through the room the way silence sometimes does. Not all at once, but in a wave, person to person, table to table, until there was a noticeable attenuation in the ambient noise that caused even those who hadn't been paying attention to look up. Dominic looked up. Evelyn Viscari was standing at the entrance to his $400,000 charity gala with her son's wife on her arm, and every person in the room was watching, and she waited until she was certain of that before she spoke. Her voice carried. It always had. "The only woman worthy of carrying the Viscari name," she said, in the particular tone she used when she was not asking for agreement, "is the one you just disgraced." The room held its breath. Dominic Viscari stood at the center of it with a champagne glass in his hand, and his mistress at his side, and his mother's words moving through 300 people like a current through still water, and he did not speak. Because there was nothing, Naomi understood, that he could say. Not here. Not with this audience. Whatever he said would be the wrong thing, and Evelyn had understood that perfectly, had calculated it with the precision of someone who had spent decades winning arguments in rooms where the cost of losing was substantially higher than embarrassment. Naomi felt Evelyn's hand tighten on her arm. She did not cry. She was nowhere near crying. What she felt was something harder and less comfortable than grief. Something that had to do with the specific exhaustion of having managed her own dignity for 11 years and finding herself, on this particular evening, suddenly not having to do it alone. She stood on the landing beside her mother-in-law and let the room look at her. And the room looked. Marcus Webb, near the bar, had gone very still. Vincent Carano had set down his drink. Sal Mantovani's son was watching with the focused attention of a young man filing information he expected to need later. The serving staff had collectively stopped moving. Even the string quartet in the far corner had allowed itself a small pause, though possibly that was coincidence. Sabrina Cross, at Dominic's side, was looking at Evelyn with an expression that she was working hard to keep neutral. She was not entirely succeeding. Dominic met his mother's eyes across the room. Evelyn held his gaze for a moment, unhurried, composed, with the absolute stillness of someone who has already decided the outcome of the conversation she is having. And then she looked away from him the way you look away from something that no longer requires your attention, and said to Naomi quietly enough that only Naomi could hear, "We're going to the study. There are things you need to know about the accounts." Naomi looked at her. "Now?" she said. "Especially now," Evelyn said. They descended the 2 steps. The crowd parted without being asked to. It was not deference exactly. Or not only deference. It was the slightly dazed cooperation of people recalibrating, of people who had arrived at this evening with a particular understanding of the hierarchy and were now conducting rapid internal revisions. They crossed the ballroom floor. Naomi kept her eyes forward. She was aware of Dominic somewhere in her peripheral vision, aware of him the way you're aware of a fire in a room, not because you're watching it, but because your body is constantly monitoring it. But she did not look at him. She had spent 11 years finding ways to look at Dominic Viscari that communicated the right combination of things: deference and competence and loyalty and a certain calibrated distance that indicated she was not a threat. She was done with that calibration tonight. They exited the ballroom through the north corridor. The noise dropped behind them. The carpet in the north corridor was thicker than the service corridor she had used 20 minutes ago. This was the client corridor, the one that led to the private meeting rooms and the executive study that the hotel maintained for Viscari Family Foundation events, a room Naomi had used dozens of times in her capacity as the family's primary event coordinator. Evelyn released her arm once they were through the door. "Sit," she said. Naomi sat in one of the chairs near the window. The city below them was a grid of lights and moving tail lights and the particular beauty of nighttime Manhattan, which she had long since stopped really seeing because it had become the backdrop of her life, and you stopped seeing backdrops. She sat and folded her hands in her lap and waited for Evelyn to tell her whatever she had decided to tell her. Evelyn did not sit. She moved to the desk in the corner of the room and opened the bottom left drawer. She had been in this room before, clearly, had used this desk, and removed a thin folder. She set it on the desk and left it there for a moment, her hand flat on top of it, looking out the window in the same direction as Naomi, seeing the city with what appeared to be the same mild, unseen familiarity. "How long have you known?" Evelyn asked. Naomi considered the question carefully. It was not, she understood, a casual question. "Known what specifically?" she said. "About the accounts." A pause. "Which accounts?" Naomi said. Evelyn turned and looked at her with an expression that, for a woman of her composure, came relatively close to impatience. "Don't do that. Not tonight. Not with me." Naomi looked at her hands, then she looked up. 3 months, she said. "Maybe slightly longer." Evelyn nodded, as if this confirmed something she already suspected, but needed confirmed. "And you said nothing." "I didn't have enough to say anything coherent. I had fragments. I kept thinking I was misreading the structure." "You weren't misreading it." "No," Naomi said. "I know that now." Evelyn came away from the desk and sat down, finally, in the chair across from her. She opened the folder and placed 3 pages on the surface of the table between them. They were financial documents, account summaries, transfer records, routing numbers. Naomi recognized the format. She had been looking at documents very much like these in the hours she had spent, over the past several months, trying to understand what she was seeing without having access to the complete picture. "Sabrina Cross has been moving money," Evelyn said. "Not dramatically, small amounts spread across 17 accounts, in a pattern that looks like routine variance until you map it against the operational schedule. Then it becomes visible." She paused. "I've been mapping it for 4 months." Naomi stared at the documents. "You've been watching this for 4 months," she said. "Yes." "And you didn't tell Dominic?" Evelyn looked at her steadily. "I'm telling you." The weight of that sat in the room between them for a moment. Naomi picked up the first page and studied it. Transfer records. 7-figure amounts routed through what appeared to be legitimate subsidiary accounts before disappearing into a layered structure she would need time to fully untangle. But the shape of it was already visible. The shape of it was the shape of someone systematically hollowing out a structure from the inside, slowly enough that the structural damage wouldn't be obvious until it was too late to repair. "This isn't just theft," Naomi said. "No," Evelyn said. "It isn't. This is positioning." She looked up. "Someone's positioning themselves for something. You don't build a structure like this just to take money. You build it to be in a specific place when something happens." Evelyn said nothing, which was, Naomi had learned, her way of confirming something without having to say it. "What's going to happen?" Naomi said. "I don't know the specifics," Evelyn said. "I know the timeline is shorter than I'd like." She leaned forward slightly. "That's why I'm telling you now, not tomorrow, not after the gala, now." Naomi set the page down. She looked at the woman across from her, the woman who had 20 minutes ago stood at the entrance of a ballroom and said, in front of 300 of the most dangerous people in New York, that Naomi Hale was the only woman worthy of carrying the Vescari name. The woman who had then, without explanation, walked her out of the room and into a study and placed 3 pages of financial documentation on a table in front of her. "Why me?" Naomi said. It was not a question about tonight. It was a question about everything, about why Evelyn Vescari had spent the last 3 years treating her daughter-in-law with a respect that Dominic himself rarely bothered to demonstrate, about why she had assigned Rourke to include Naomi in the security briefings, about why she had made sure Naomi had access to the family's complete financial infrastructure at a level that went well beyond what a wife was typically given. Evelyn looked at her for a moment with that assessing, unsentimental quality. "Because," she said, "you're the only one in this family who has been paying attention." It was not the most flattering framing. It was also, Naomi understood, the most accurate one. And from Evelyn Vescari, accuracy was as close to love as you were likely to get. She picked up the documents again. I'm going to need access to the full subsidiary ledgers, she said. You have it. And the operational schedule for the next 6 weeks. Already pulled. Naomi looked up. You prepared this. I've been preparing it, Evelyn said, since the night I realized my son was going to make a very stupid decision and I wasn't going to be able to stop him. The noise of the ballroom was barely audible from here. A murmur, a vibration in the floor, the distant evidence of 300 people continuing their evening, as if the evening had not just shifted on its axis. Somewhere in that murmur, Dominic Vescari was still standing with Sabrina Cross at his side, receiving the recalibrated attentions of a room full of people who were now, with the flexible intelligence of survivors, trying to determine where the actual power in the Vescari family resided. Naomi looked at the documents in her hands. She looked at the window. She looked at Evelyn. There's something else, she said. It wasn't a question. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. The particular quality of the quiet told Naomi she was right. The money isn't going to one place, Evelyn said finally. The routing structure, when you follow it far enough, there are multiple endpoints. Some of them I recognize, some of them I don't. The ones I don't recognize are the ones that concern me. Because they could be anyone. Because they could be anyone, Evelyn confirmed, including people who have every reason to want the Vescari family to stop existing. The city lights moved beyond the window. A helicopter traced a slow arc across the distance. Naomi sat with the documents in her hands, and the full architecture of what Evelyn was telling her assembling itself in her mind. Not yet complete, not yet coherent in all its parts, but taking shape. The shape of something large. The shape of something that had been building, quietly and carefully, for longer than anyone had been looking. Sabrina Cross was the visible face. She understood that now. The woman in the scarlet gown, the obvious provocation, the mistress who walked into a room she wasn't supposed to be in, Sabrina Cross was designed to be looked at, which meant that whatever was operating behind her, the real structure, the real design, was operating in the space that Sabrina's visibility created. In the attention Sabrina commanded, something else moved unobserved. Does Dominic know? She asked. Dominic, Evelyn said with a flatness that contained multitudes, is currently standing in the ballroom with the very person who has been systematically dismantling everything he built, and he believes she loves him. Naomi was quiet. He won't listen, she said. Not to me. Not about this. Not yet, Evelyn said. The not yet landed the way Evelyn intended things to land. Precisely. Naomi set the documents down on the table. She smoothed the corner of the top page with her thumb, a small, habitual gesture she made when organizing her thinking. She was aware that she was sitting in a hotel study on the night her husband had publicly humiliated her with approximately 300 witnesses, and that she was not thinking about the humiliation. She was thinking about routing numbers and subsidiary ledgers and the endpoints of a financial structure that someone had spent considerable time and intelligence constructing. She was, she realized, not surprised by this about herself. She was not sure what that meant about the last 11 years. She was not going to examine it tonight. I need 2 weeks, she said. You have one, Evelyn said. Naomi looked at her. The operational timeline is shorter than I'd like, Evelyn said again. Outside, the gala continued. Somewhere below, in the city that never actually slept so much as shifted its rhythms in the dark, other things were continuing too. The subsidiary accounts were moving in their patient, incremental pattern. The endpoints that Evelyn didn't recognize were waiting for whatever signal they were waiting for. And Dominic Vescari was standing in a ballroom surrounded by people whose loyalty was contingent and whose recalibrations were ongoing, believing in the fidelity of a woman who had spent months building the architecture of his destruction. Naomi picked up the documents and began to read. 1 week, she thought. She had spent 4 months working with fragments and incomplete information and the constant risk that she was misreading the pattern. Now she had the full picture, or closer to it. Now she had Evelyn's 4 months of work to add to her own 3. Now she had access to the complete subsidiary ledgers. 1 week might be enough. It would have to be. Because she had seen the routing structure now, had seen the shape of what Sabrina was building toward, and there was a timeline embedded in it, a logic, a point at which all the pieces would be in position and the person or persons at the far end of those unrecognized endpoints would move. She didn't know what that move looked like yet. She didn't know who was at the end of those routing numbers. She didn't know how deep the conspiracy went, how many of the captains downstairs might be part of it, whether the hesitation she had noticed in certain members of Dominic's inner circle over the past several months was ordinary political repositioning or something more structured. But she was going to find out. She turned the second page. Behind her, Evelyn Viscari settled back in her chair and watched her daughter-in-law read with the specific quality of attention that, had anyone else been present to observe it, might have looked something like relief, or something like satisfaction, or something like the recognition in another person of a quality you had spent a long time hoping to find. The gala noise continued below them. The city moved beyond the window. Naomi turned the third page, and her face went very still, and something in the set of her jaw changed in a way that was small and quiet, and meant nothing to anyone who didn't know how to read her. She had found the first endpoint, and she recognized the name. The name on the third page was Raymond Holt. Naomi stared at it for a long time without moving. The document was a routing summary, intermediate transfers, third-tier accounts, the kind of paperwork that existed specifically to be unreadable to anyone who wasn't already looking for it. Raymond Holt's name appeared as a beneficiary designation on a shell account registered in Delaware, layered behind two other shells, the kind of structure that took patience and specific knowledge to build and more patience to find. She had not found it in 3 months of looking. Evelyn had found it in 4. Raymond Holt was Vincent Carano's consigliere. He had been with the Carano family for 19 years. He was 53 years old, unremarkable in appearance, the kind of man who existed in the margins of rooms rather than their centers, which was, Naomi had always understood, precisely the kind of man you needed to worry about. She had sat across from him at 6 family dinners. She had exchanged exactly the kind of measured, careful pleasantries that people in this world exchanged when they were being professionally cordial, which meant nothing was real and everything was information. She set the page down. "Raymond Holt," she said. "Yes," Evelyn said. "Carano's man." "Carano's man," Evelyn confirmed, with the particular flatness she used when a confirmation was also an indictment. Naomi stood up. She moved to the window and stood looking at the city with her arms crossed, and her mind doing the thing it did when a pattern became suddenly legible, running backward through everything she thought she knew, reassessing, reconstructing. If Holt was an endpoint, then the conspiracy was not internal to the Viscari family alone. It was external. It was a coordinated play by a rival structure, using Sabrina Cross as the internal access point, using Dominic's own ego as the unlocked door. "Carano was downstairs tonight," she said. "Yes." "And he knows you know." A pause. "I don't believe so," Evelyn said. "Not yet." Naomi turned from the window. "How long before he does?" Evelyn looked at her steadily. "That depends on how quickly you move." She did not go home that night. Evelyn arranged a room on the 38th floor, 2 floors below the ballroom, in the residential section of the Caldwell Tower that the Viscari family maintained as a quasi-permanent suite for precisely the kind of evening that required someone to remain close and invisible at the same time. Naomi sat at the desk in the suite's small office with Evelyn's documents spread across the surface and her own notebook open beside them, and she worked until 4 in the morning with the focused, slightly dissociated concentration of someone who understands that time has become a structural constraint rather than an abstraction. She did not think about the ballroom. She thought about numbers. At 4:17, her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Dominic. She let it buzz. It stopped. 30 seconds later, it buzzed again. She turned it face down and kept working. At 5:40, she heard a door in the adjacent room and then Rourke's voice, low, in conversation with someone she didn't immediately identify. She crossed to the connecting door and opened it. Rourke was standing near the window in the sitting room with a man named Carver, one of Evelyn's preferred analysts, a former accountant who had worked for the family since slightly before Naomi had arrived, and who existed in the specific professional category of people who were indispensable precisely because they never spoke about being indispensable. He was carrying a leather portfolio and looked like he had not slept. "Mrs. Vescari asked me to come," Carver said. Naomi opened the connecting door wider. "Come in." They worked for another 3 hours. Carver had access to records Naomi hadn't seen, deeper subsidiary structures, a parallel set of accounts that ran alongside the main operational ledgers in a way that would have been invisible without knowing to look for it. What emerged, slowly and with the specific ugliness of something that has been carefully hidden becoming visible, was a timeline. The money had been moving for 14 months. 14 months. Naomi had been in this marriage for 11 years. Sabrina Cross had been in Dominic's life for approximately 20 months, based on what she had been able to determine from the pattern of his absences and the particular quality of his distraction during that period. That meant the financial structure had been established before the personal relationship deepened, which meant Sabrina had been positioned, placed. The relationship with Dominic was the mechanism, not the motivation. "She was recruited," Naomi said. Carver looked up from the ledgers. "That's one interpretation. What's the other interpretation?" He was quiet for a moment. "That she approached them." Naomi considered that. It was, she decided, a distinction that mattered less than the structural fact that Sabrina Cross was not operating independently. She was one element of something that had multiple elements. Raymond Holt was another. There were almost certainly others she hadn't identified yet. "I need the complete list of Carano's business intersections with Vescari operations," she said. "Every shared shipment, every co-signed agreement, every point where the two families have been operating in proximity over the last 2 years." Carver nodded and made a note. "And I need it before tonight." He looked up. "That's a significant amount of documentation." "I know what it is," she said. Dominic called 3 more times before noon. She took the 4th call. "Where are you?" he said. No preamble. The voice of a man who was not accustomed to things being where he couldn't find them. "Working," she said. "I need you to come home." "I'm not coming home yet." A silence. The kind of silence that in the early years of their marriage she had spent significant energy trying to interpret and eventually learned to simply wait out. "Naomi." "Dominic," she said back, in the same register he'd used her name, declarative, not questioning. Another silence. Then, with a shift in tone that she recognized as something he deployed when he wanted to appear to be offering something, "Last night got out of hand." She let that sit. "That's what you have for me," she said. "I'm not going to argue about Sabrina." "I'm not arguing about Sabrina," she said. "Sabrina is the least of my concerns right now." He paused. She heard him process that, heard the slight shift in his breathing that indicated he was recalibrating what kind of conversation this was. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said carefully, "that there are things happening in the family's financial structure that you need to be made aware of. And I would like to do that in person, at a time and place where we're not going to be overheard or interrupted." A longer pause. "What things?" "Not on the phone." "Naomi, not on the phone," she said again. And the firmness in it was not aggressive, but it was absolute, and she could feel him on the other end of the line doing the thing he did when he encountered something he hadn't expected, assessing, recalibrating, running the angle. "Tonight?" he said finally. "The house. 9 o'clock. "Fine," she said. She ended the call and sat for a moment with the phone in her hand. Then she went back to the documents. She arrived at the Vescari estate at 8:50. The house was a federal-style property in Westchester that Evelyn had purchased in the 1980s and that had been expanded twice since. A 12-room structure that managed to be large without being ostentatious, which was itself a kind of statement about the family's aesthetic philosophy, or at least about Evelyn's. The grounds were well-maintained and the security was invisible and very good. Naomi had lived here for 6 of her 11 years of marriage before Dominic moved their primary residence to the penthouse on the Upper East Side, which he preferred because it put him closer to the city and closer to the specific rhythm of power that he needed the way other men needed sleep. She parked her own car, which she rarely did. There were always drivers, always the apparatus of being a Viscari wife. But tonight she had driven herself from the tower, and the 40-minute drive had been the first quiet she'd had since the night before. She was aware, sitting in the driveway for a moment before getting out, that she was about to walk into a conversation with her husband that could go multiple directions, only some of which she could control. She had information. That was leverage. She also had the event of the previous evening hanging between them, unaddressed, which was the kind of thing that Dominic would use if he felt the conversation becoming uncomfortable for him. Deflect to the personal, make it about her response to what happened, reframe the evening as an overreaction on her part that needed to be managed before they could address whatever she wanted to discuss. She knew the playbook. She'd been watching it for 11 years. She got out of the car. Rourke was at the door. He opened it without comment, which was his default mode, and then said quietly as she passed, "He's not alone." She stopped. "Who's with him?" she said. Rourke's face said nothing. His voice said, "Marcus Webb." She processed that. Marcus Webb was Dominic's consigliere, his closest advisor, the man who had been standing 6 feet away during the confrontation at the gala and had appeared to be looking elsewhere. Marcus Webb was also, she now understood from the documents she'd spent the last 14 hours studying, a man whose signature appeared on 3 of the intermediate transfer accounts, not as a beneficiary, as an authorizing signatory. She did not know yet what that meant. It could mean he was complicit. It could mean his signature had been forged or appropriated. It could mean he was performing his own quiet investigation and had left evidence of that investigation in the account records, which was the kind of thing a careful man might do to create a paper trail of his own legitimate access. She could not walk into that room and show Dominic the documents with Marcus Webb present, not until she knew which version of Marcus Webb she was dealing with. "Thank you," she said to Rourke. She went in. They were in the study, the one at the back of the house, Evelyn's preferred room, though Evelyn herself was not present tonight. The study had walls of dark wood and a fireplace that wasn't running, and 2 leather chairs positioned across from a wide desk, and Dominic was standing near the window in the way he always stood when he was preparing for a conversation he considered adversarial, which was with his hands at his sides and his weight slightly forward, a posture that was not aggressive but communicated readiness for aggression in the way that a coiled thing communicates coiling. Marcus Webb was in one of the chairs. He stood when she entered, which was a courtesy that he consistently extended and which she had always assessed as genuine rather than performed. He was 60 years old, compact, gray at the temples, with the specific quality of stillness that distinguished men who were genuinely calm from men who were working at appearing calm. "Naomi," Marcus said. "Marcus." She looked at Dominic. "I thought we were meeting alone." "Marcus is family," Dominic said. "I know who Marcus is." The sentence landed with a precision she hadn't entirely planned, or perhaps had planned without being fully conscious of it. She watched Marcus's face for something and found nothing readable, which was itself information. Dominic moved away from the window. "Sit down." "I'll stand." His jaw moved, a small involuntary adjustment. "Fine. You said there were financial concerns." "Yes." "Tell me." She looked at Marcus. Then she looked back at Dominic. "I'd rather do this privately." "I told you, Marcus is—" "I know what you told me," she said. "I'm telling you that the conversation I'm trying to have with you is one that needs to happen between us first, before anyone else. That's not negotiable." She kept her voice even. She kept everything even. "This is your empire, Dominic. I'm trying to give you information about a threat to it in the way that protects you best. If you don't want that, tell me now, and I'll go." The room was quiet. The fireplace that wasn't running cast no sound. Somewhere in the house, a clock was marking the seconds. Marcus Webb stood up. He buttoned his jacket, a small, precise gesture. "I'll be in the kitchen," he said, to no one in particular, and walked past Naomi without looking at her, close enough that she could have reached out and touched him. She didn't. She watched him go. The door closed. Dominic looked at her. "This better be worth it." "It is," she said, and opened the folder she was carrying. She laid the documents on the desk one at a time, deliberately, the way Evelyn had laid them for her. She did not rush it. She let him look at each one before she placed the next, because she had learned, from a lifetime of watching powerful men be given information they didn't want to have, that pacing mattered. Give it too fast and they defended. Give it in pieces, in the right order, and sometimes the defense didn't fully assemble before the facts were already inside it. She walked him through the routing structure. She explained the 14-month timeline. She showed him the subsidiary accounts, the pattern of transfers, the incremental hollowing that only became visible when you mapped it against the operational calendar. He did not interrupt. That was unusual. Dominic interrupted frequently, habitually, not always from impatience, but from the need to demonstrate that he was processing faster than the information was being given. Tonight he stood and listened and looked at the documents with an expression she could not entirely read, which was also unusual because she had spent 11 years learning to read him. When she placed the final page on the desk, the routing summary with Raymond Holt's name, his expression changed. It was subtle, a compression around the eyes, a stillness in the rest of his face that indicated he was controlling something. "Where did you get this?" he said. "I've been building it for 3 months," she said, "with help for the last 2 days." "What help?" She looked at him. He made a sound that was not quite a word. "My mother. She's been working on her portion for 4 months." He turned away from the desk. He walked to the window, the dark window, the grounds beyond it invisible in the October night, and stood with his back to her and his hands clasped behind him. And she watched the set of his shoulders and thought about how many times she had watched this posture and tried to determine what was happening inside it. "Holt," he said. It was barely a word. "Holt," she confirmed. "Vincent's man." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Vincent himself?" "I don't know yet," she said. "Holt's name is in the structure. Carano's isn't. That could mean Carano is clean and Holt is operating independently, or it could mean Carano is careful." "Vincent is careful," Dominic said to the window. "He's always been careful." "I know." Another silence. She waited. She had learned that when Dominic was processing something that genuinely surprised him, which was rare, which was why she knew it when it happened, the most effective thing she could do was give him the space to arrive at it himself. Rushing him caused defensiveness. Patience sometimes allowed him to reach, on his own, the place she needed him to reach. He turned. "Sabrina," he said. She met his eyes. "Sabrina is the access point. She's not the architect." She watched that land, watched him take it apart and reconstruct it and look at it from the angle she was offering. The muscle in his jaw moved. Once. Then he looked at the documents on the desk with an expression that, for the first time tonight, she recognized completely, because it was the same expression he wore when he understood that something he had trusted had been constructed specifically to be trusted, and that he had been exactly the mark it was designed for. She had seen that expression once before in their marriage. She did not think she had ever expected to feel what she felt looking at it now, which was not satisfaction and not quite pity, but something that existed in the narrow, uncomfortable space between them. "You should have told me 3 months ago," he said. "I didn't have enough." "You should have told me anyway." "You wouldn't have listened," she said. "Not about Sabrina, not from me, not 3 months ago." He said nothing, which was also a confirmation. "I'm telling you now," she said, "because now I have enough, and because whatever the timeline is, we're inside it. The structure is close to the activation point. I don't know exactly what that means operationally, but the financial positioning suggests something is being prepared to happen within the next 2 to 3 weeks. He looked at her across the desk with its spread of documents that represented 14 months of someone else's careful work against everything he'd spent his life building. "We," he said. She looked back at him without looking away. "That's what I said." He held her gaze for a long moment. She couldn't tell what was moving behind his eyes. Couldn't tell if it was the beginning of something or just the old reflexes managing a new situation the same way they managed everything. She didn't know. She had married him for reasons she had long since stopped finding fully coherent, had stayed for reasons she found even less coherent, and was standing in this room tonight not for any reason that had to do with their marriage at all, but because she had looked at those documents and understood what was at stake. and found that the part of her that was capable of walking away from it was smaller than she had ever expected. "I need to make calls," he said. "Not yet." She reached across the desk and pulled the routing summary toward her. "Not until we know who you can call safely." He stared at her. "Marcus Webb's signature is on 3 of the intermediate accounts," she said. The silence this time was different from the ones before it. It had a specific texture. She watched him absorb it, watched the first, involuntary response cross his face before he could manage it, and what she saw there was not surprise. Or not entirely surprise, which meant he had wondered about Marcus, which meant something had already been nagging at the edge of his attention, some small inconsistency he had noted and filed and not yet examined. "You knew something was off," she said. "I didn't know anything. But you'd noticed something." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down in the chair behind the desk, heavily, in the way of a man whose legs have made a decision his pride hasn't finished catching up to, and put both hands flat on the surface and stared at the documents. "How long," he said, "before you can give me a complete picture?" "Days," she said. "Maybe less if Carver has the remaining subsidiary records." "What do you need from me?" She pulled a chair out and sat down across from him, and the symmetry of it was not lost on her. The two of them on either side of a desk covered with evidence of everything that had been done against him, in the house his mother had built, in the city that had always been his. And she said, "I need you to act like nothing has changed, for a few days. Can you do that?" He looked at her with something she couldn't name. "You're asking me to pretend." "I'm asking you to be patient," she said. "Which is harder?" He was quiet. Outside the study, the house was still. Rourke was somewhere, so the kitchen, presumably, with Marcus Webb. 2 men in a room together, one of whom might be the enemy, and one of whom was the last line of protection between this family and what was coming, and she didn't know yet which was which. Dominic's phone buzzed on the desk. He looked at it. Then he looked at Naomi. The screen showed a name. She read it upside down, which she had learned to do years ago without appearing to. Sabrina. He reached out and turned the phone face down without answering it. It was a small gesture, almost nothing. In another context, it would have meant nothing at all. She looked at him across the desk and understood that something had shifted between them. Not repaired, nothing like repaired, but shifted. In the way that tectonic things shift when the pressure beneath them reaches a certain threshold. Not with drama, but with the deep structural inevitability of something that has been building toward a specific moment and has now arrived at it. She picked up her pen. "Start at the beginning," she said. "Tell me every interaction you've had with Vincent Carano in the last 6 months. Everything, even the things that felt routine." He looked at her for one more moment. Then he started talking. And 3 floors above them, in the room she had kept for herself in this house, since the night she first understood that she might someday need a room of her own in it, Naomi's secondary phone, the one Evelyn had given her 4 days ago, the one with the encrypted line, lit up with a message from a number she didn't recognize. It said, "She knows you have the documents. You have less time than you think." Naomi read the message 3 times. She was standing in the upstairs room, Evelyn's secondary sitting room, the one with the narrow writing desk and the single window that looked out over the east garden. And she had come up here 20 minutes ago on the pretext of retrieving additional documentation, leaving Dominic in the study with instructions not to contact anyone until she returned. The encrypted phone had been sitting on the desk where she'd left it, dark and silent, and then it wasn't. "She knows you have the documents. You have less time than you think." No name. No number she recognized. The encrypted line was supposed to be known only to Evelyn and Carver, which meant either the line had been compromised or someone with access to Evelyn's network was feeding information in both directions, or this was something else entirely. A warning from a source she hadn't identified, someone inside the conspiracy who had a reason to give her information she needed. She could not determine which of those it was from 14 words on a screen. She went back downstairs. Dominic was still at the desk. He had not moved the documents. He had not touched his phone. He was sitting with his forearms on the desk surface and his hands loosely clasped, staring at nothing in particular. And when she came through the door, he looked up with an alertness that was not quite hope and not quite dread, but contained elements of both. She showed him the phone. He read the message. His jaw tightened. "When?" Just now, while I was upstairs. Who has that number? Evelyn, Carver. No one else that I know of. She watched his face. Evelyn gave me that phone 4 days ago. If the number leaked, it leaked from somewhere inside her network. Dominic stood up. He was not a man who processed things while sitting. He moved to the fireplace and stood with one hand on the mantel and his back to her, which was both a thinking posture and a way of not having to manage his face while he was thinking. "Where's my mother?" he said. "I don't know. She was at the tower when I left this morning. I haven't spoken to her since noon." He turned. "Call her." "On what line?" He stopped. He understood the problem the same moment she said it. If the encrypted phone was compromised, calling Evelyn on it potentially told whoever was watching that she was aware of the message. And calling on any standard line risked a different kind of exposure. "Rourke," Naomi said. Dominic nodded once. He went to the door and opened it and said Rourke's name at a volume calibrated to reach the kitchen without traveling further. Rourke appeared in under 30 seconds, which meant he had been closer than the kitchen. "Find my mother," Dominic said. "In person. Don't call her. Go to wherever she is and bring her here or confirm she's secure. Don't tell anyone where you're going." Rourke looked at him for 1 second. Then he left. The house felt quieter after that, in the way that houses feel quiet when the thing filling the air isn't absence of sound but the particular density of people trying not to let anything show. Naomi looked at Marcus Webb's closed door down the hall. "Marcus needs to leave," she said. "I can't throw Marcus out of the house without a reason. Tell him we're having a private family conversation. Tell him anything. He cannot be here if we're trying to contain this." If Marcus is clean, he'll understand," she said. "And if he isn't, then every minute he's in this house is a minute we're compromised." Dominic looked at her with the particular expression of a man being asked to act against his instincts by someone whose judgment he was still, even now, only partially willing to trust. It was an expression she knew. She held his gaze and let him arrive at it himself. He went and knocked on the kitchen door. She didn't hear the conversation. She heard the register of it, Dominic's voice, level and controlled, and Marcus's response, shorter than she expected, and then the sound of a chair and footsteps and the front door, and then Dominic came back down the hall alone. "He didn't argue," he said. "No," she said. "He just left." "Yes." They looked at each other. A man who doesn't argue when asked to leave is either completely innocent or completely prepared for the request. Neither of them said that. They both understood it. Evelyn arrived at 11:40. Rourke had found her at the Caldwell Tower, still in the residential suite, in a conversation with Carver that she ended immediately when Rourke delivered Dominic's message. She came through the front door of the Westchester house with her coat still on and went directly to the study without removing it, which was the closest thing to urgency that Naomi had ever seen from her. She read the message on the encrypted phone without touching it, standing over the desk. Then she looked at Carver, who had come with her, and said, "The secondary routing number." Carver's face changed. It was a small change, a compression, a tightening around the eyes. But it was the first time Naomi had seen anything penetrate his professional composure, and the fact that it did told her something before he said a word. "What secondary routing number?" Naomi said. Carver looked at Evelyn. "Tell her," Evelyn said. He set his portfolio on the desk and opened it and removed a single page that he placed in front of Naomi. It was a routing summary, formatted identically to the ones she had been working with for the past 2 days. Same structure, same layout, but the account numbers were different. And the authorization signature at the bottom was one she had not seen in any of the previous documentation. She looked at it for a long moment. "This is Evelyn's signature," she said. The room was silent. She looked up. Evelyn was watching her with that quality of absolute stillness that Naomi had spent years interpreting and now, in this specific moment, could not read at all. "Explain this to me," Naomi said. "It's a mirror account," Evelyn said. "A structure I built 18 months ago to track the incoming transfers, a shadow of their architecture, designed to make their money move through channels I controlled so I could monitor the flow without their knowledge." Or, Naomi said, because she had to say it, because not saying it would be a failure of the same precision Evelyn had always demanded from her. It's a second set of accounts that someone could use to argue you were participating. Evelyn looked at her. Yes. Which someone has apparently already used to send a warning to a phone they weren't supposed to know existed. Yes. So whoever sent that message either found the mirror accounts and misread them, or found them and understood them perfectly, Evelyn said, and is using them as leverage. The word leverage sat in the room. Dominic, who had been standing near the window through this entire exchange, turned. Mother. His voice had a quality she had rarely heard in it, stripped of its habitual control, something raw underneath. What else is in those accounts that I don't know about? Evelyn looked at her son. Everything I did, she said, I did to protect this family. That is not an answer. I know it isn't. Tell me what's in them. Evelyn removed her coat finally, folding it over the back of a chair with the same deliberate precision she brought to everything, and then she sat down. Naomi watched her do it and noticed, for the first time in years of watching Evelyn Vescari move through rooms, that she looked tired. 11 months ago, Evelyn said, I made a payment, through the mirror structure, to a man named Decker. He does private intelligence work, financial forensics, the kind of investigation that doesn't go through official channels. She paused. I hired him to build a complete picture of Sabrina Cross's network before anyone else in this family knew there was a network to investigate. And, Dominic said, and Decker is Raymond Holt's brother-in-law. The silence this time was of a different quality than all the previous silences. It had weight. It had the specific heaviness of a structure revealing that its load-bearing elements are not where anyone thought they were. Naomi understood it before anyone else spoke. She understood it the way she understood financial structures, not from the visible surface, but from the shape of the thing underneath. Evelyn had hired an investigator who was, by blood and presumably by loyalty, connected to one of the primary architects of the conspiracy, which meant that Decker had not been working for Evelyn, or had not been working only for Evelyn. He had been working in both directions, taking Evelyn's money, providing her with enough real information to establish credibility, and simultaneously feeding everything she learned back to Holt, which meant that Sabrina Cross had known, for 11 months, that Evelyn was investigating her, which meant the gala, Sabrina's appearance at the gala, Dominic's public humiliation of Naomi, the entire sequence of events that had led to this room on this night, had not been improvised. It had been managed. They had been moved into position. She let me find the documents, Naomi said. The words came out quietly, not with emotion, with the flat quality of something being stated because it needs to be stated. Everyone in the room looked at her. The documents Evelyn gave me, the routing summaries, Raymond Holt's name, the timeline. She let me find all of it, or Decker arranged for me to be able to find it. She looked at Evelyn. How much of what you gave me came from Decker's work? Evelyn's expression answered before she did. Most of it, Naomi said. The core architecture, Evelyn said. Yes. Naomi sat down. She sat down because her legs had made a quiet, private decision that standing was no longer what they wanted to do. And she had learned over the years not to argue with her body when it gave her information. She sat and she looked at the documents spread across the desk, and she understood what she was looking at. A map, not of Sabrina's conspiracy, of the path Sabrina wanted Naomi to follow. The information was real. She was almost certain the information was real. The account structures, the transfer records, Raymond Holt's involvement. You didn't construct 14 months of genuine financial movement as a fiction just to mislead one person. The underlying conspiracy was real. What had been manipulated was her access to it, the shape of what she found, the sequence, the pace. She had been given a picture that was accurate but incomplete, and the incompleteness was the design. She had been finding exactly what she was supposed to find, at exactly the right time. They wanted me to bring this to Dominic, she said. Yes, Evelyn said. Why? Evelyn looked at her son. Dominic was still standing near the window. His face was the controlled mask again, the public face, the management face, but his hands at his sides were not entirely still. Because, Evelyn said, there's a summit in 4 days. Naomi looked at her. A summit with the other families, Evelyn said. Carano, Mantovani, the Reyes group from Jersey. It was arranged 6 weeks ago to negotiate the shipping distribution in the Northern Corridor. It's legitimate. Or it was when it was arranged. She paused. If Dominic walks into that summit believing he has identified and contained the threat, believing that Holt is the primary architect, that Sabrina is under control, that the conspiracy is essentially exposed, he will walk in without his full defensive posture. He will walk in believing the hard work is done. And the hard work isn't done, Naomi said. The summit, Evelyn said, is the activation point. The room held that. Naomi sat with it and felt it settle into the structure of everything else she knew and understood that it fit perfectly. That the financial timeline she had mapped, the 14 months of positioning, pointed exactly to a window that contained a summit of the Northeastern families, a room full of the most powerful men in the organization, Dominic at the center of it, his guard partially lowered by the belief that he had already won. How many people at that summit are part of it? She said. I don't know, Evelyn said. That's what I don't know. Carano. Possibly. Probably. Mantovani. I don't know. The Reyes Group. I don't know. Evelyn's voice, for the first time, had something in it that was close to strain. Decker gave me Holt and Sabrina and the financial architecture. He gave me enough to make the picture look complete. Everything past that, the summit, the operational plan. Who exactly is in the room and what their role is, I don't have. I didn't know I didn't have it until tonight. Dominic moved away from the window. He came to the desk and picked up the routing summary with Holt's name and looked at it for a moment, then set it back down. His face was doing something complex and largely internal. Sabrina, he said. It came out differently than it had earlier. Earlier, it had been the name of someone he was reconfiguring his understanding of. Now it was something else. Flatter. More final. She'll know by now that you didn't answer her call tonight, Naomi said. I know. If Decker's feeding information back to Holt, they may already know you've been told. They may be accelerating. I know. He put both hands on the desk. What do we do? It was the second time he'd asked her a version of that question tonight, and the second time she felt the weight of what it meant coming from him. Dominic Viscari did not ask people what to do. He had built an empire specifically so that people asked him. The fact that he was asking her, not Evelyn, not Marcus, her, was information she filed carefully and did not examine yet. We need to know who's in that room, she said. Before the summit, we need a complete picture of the operational plan. What's actually going to happen, how they intend to execute it. And we need to know it without Decker, without anyone connected to the existing network. 4 days, Evelyn said. 4 days, Naomi confirmed. How? Dominic said. She thought about it. She thought about it with the same focused, slightly dissociated concentration she'd brought to the documents at 4 a.m, and she ran through what she actually had, stripped of everything Decker had fed them, and found it thinner than she wanted, but not nothing. Sabrina needs to believe nothing has changed, she said. She needs to believe that her message tonight was either not received or not understood. She needs to believe that Dominic is still where she wants him, angry at me, distracted by the fallout from the gala, focused inward. She looked at Dominic. That means you need to call her back. His expression didn't change. And say what? Say you've been dealing with family drama. Say your mother caused a scene and now you're managing the aftermath. Say whatever you would have said to her before tonight. She held his gaze. Can you do that? The question was not about acting ability. They both knew it. He looked at her for a moment, then he picked up his phone. Get out of the room, he said. Both of you. Naomi and Evelyn moved to the hallway. Through the closed study door, after a moment, she heard his voice, just low, controlled, with the particular register he used when he was being personal, a register she had once spent significant energy cataloging and had eventually stopped allowing herself to think about. She stood in the hallway and did not think about it now either. Evelyn stood beside her. Neither of them spoke. After 4 minutes, the study door opened. She's not concerned, Dominic said. His voice was flat. She accepted everything I told her. She didn't push, didn't ask questions. He looked at Naomi. She's not worried because she doesn't think she needs to be. Good, Naomi said. It doesn't feel good. I know. She moved back into the study and began gathering documents. It means we have a little more time than we thought. She was halfway through stacking the papers when Carver's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His face did the thing again. The compression, the tightening. What? Naomi said. He turned the phone to show her. It was a text from a number logged in his contacts as a secondary analyst. Someone on the periphery of his network, not part of the core team, a name she didn't immediately recognize. The message was 4 words. Rourke didn't come back. She went still. She looked at Dominic. He had read it over her shoulder. The stillness in his face was of a different quality than the controlled stillness she was used to. This was the stillness of a man whose body has already processed something his mind is a half-second behind. Rourke had left the house 2 hours ago to locate Evelyn. But Evelyn had come with Carver. They had found each other at the tower, and Rourke had not been with them when they arrived. She had registered that without registering it, had filed it under Rourke doing what Rourke did, which was operate with independence and minimal communication and always reappear. He had not reappeared. He knew where I was, Evelyn said. Her voice was precisely level. He knew I was coming here. He should have come back here. Naomi looked at the window. Outside was dark and quiet, and the grounds were... She counted the security staff she had seen since arriving. 2 at the gate, 1 at the front door after Rourke left, 1 on the perimeter she had noticed when she pulled in. She had assumed the security configuration was normal. She had not verified it. How many men are on the grounds tonight? She said to Dominic. He said a number. She said, Are you certain? He wasn't. She could see that he wasn't. She went to the window and looked out at the east garden. Dark, the landscape lighting low, the perimeter fence barely visible at the edge of the property. She looked at the specific positions where she knew the external security typically stood. 1 position was empty. She stepped back from the window. She turned to face the room. Dominic, Evelyn, Carver. And she understood, with the cold, complete clarity of someone who has just identified the actual shape of the problem after spending hours looking at a version of it that was designed to be looked at, that they were not 4 days away from the activation point. They were inside it. The summit was not the event. The summit was the cover. The event was this house, this night, these 4 people in a room with compromised security and a missing man and a phone number that had been fed to Sabrina Cross 11 months ago through an investigator who was never working for them. We need to move, she said. Right now. All of us. Out of this house. Naomi? Right now, Dominic. He looked at her. 1 second. The longest second she had experienced in a long time. Then he moved. He was already reaching for his phone when the lights in the east garden went out. Not the landscape lighting, the security lighting, the motion-triggered floodlights that covered the perimeter. And in the sudden absence of that light, the darkness outside the window became absolute. And from somewhere on the property came a sound that was not quite an explosion and not quite a collision, but was the specific, unmistakable sound of a gate being forced open by something with significant momentum behind it. Carver killed the lights in the study without being asked. Good instinct. Professional instinct. Naomi stood in the sudden dark with the documents pressed against her chest and her heart doing something loud and physical behind her sternum, and she thought, with the strange, detached lucidity that sometimes arrives in moments of genuine danger, that she had spent 11 years in this world as an observer, watching, mapping, managing, translating the violence around her into something she could process at a safe remove. That distance was gone. Whatever she had been before tonight, whoever she had been, the careful wife, the competent organizer, the woman who processed difficulty privately and produced composure publicly, that person was not going to be sufficient for what was coming through that gate. Dominic grabbed her arm in the dark. His grip was hard and without ceremony, the grip of a man who has done this before, moved through danger before, and she did not pull away from it. She let him pull her toward the hallway. From the front of the house came the sound of Rourke's voice, hoarse, strained, nothing like his normal register, shouting a single word through what sounded like a broken door. The word was her name. Rourke came through the front door sideways. Not because he chose to, because the door was already partially off its upper hinge, and his body was not moving entirely under his own direction. He had one hand braced on the frame and the other pressed flat against his left side. And even in the dark hallway, Naomi could see the wet blackness spreading between his fingers. He was upright. That was the only thing she could say with confidence about his condition. He was upright and he was conscious, and he had gotten himself back to the house, which told her something about Rourke that she filed away with the specific compressed efficiency of someone who has no time to feel anything about it yet. "Rourke!" Dominic was already moving toward him. "Don't." Rourke's voice was stripped to its functional minimum. He straightened against the door frame. "Don't come to the door. The east side. They came through the east side first. 3 of them that I saw. Maybe more behind." "Who?" "Don't know their faces. Professional. They moved like—" He stopped. His jaw worked. Like they'd done the property before. They'd surveilled it. Naomi's mind ran the implication before he finished the sentence. They knew the security positions. They knew the timing. They had waited for the moment that the security configuration was altered, Rourke leaving, her arrival with an unscheduled vehicle, the normal rhythm of the house disrupted, and they had moved into the disruption. "How many men do we have inside?" she said. Rourke looked at her. 2. Garza is in the kitchen. I don't know where Pellman went. I told him to stay on the back perimeter, and he's not answering. "Back perimeter is compromised," Dominic said. It wasn't a question. "Assume yes," Rourke said. Dominic turned to Evelyn. "The basement." "No," Evelyn said immediately. "Mother." "The basement has one exit, and they know this house," she said. "If they know the property, they know the basement. We'd be contained." "The garage," Naomi said. Everyone looked at her. "The garage connects to the property's secondary access road through the maintenance gate on the north side. It's not on the main security plan. It's a utility route, used for landscaping equipment and deliveries. If they surveilled the property through the security documentation, they may not have it." Dominic looked at her. "May not." "It's better odds than the basement." A sound from the east side of the house. Not close, not yet, but with the specific quality of something approaching with intention rather than accident. Glass somewhere. A window, not breaking, being managed. Someone who knew how to open a window quietly. Rourke pushed off the door frame and came fully into the hallway. His hand was still pressed to his side. "Decision," he said. "Garage," Dominic said. They moved. Dominic took Rourke's free arm over his shoulders without asking permission, which Rourke accepted without comment, the two of them achieving the compact practiced cooperation of men who had been in bad situations together before. Evelyn moved ahead of them toward the kitchen. She knew the house better than anyone, knew the internal geography the way you know the house you've lived in for 30 years, in the dark and in crisis as well as in the light. Carver was behind Naomi. She could hear him breathing, controlled, deliberate, the breathing of someone who was managing fear rather than not feeling it. She was doing the same thing. She was aware of her own heartbeat the way she was rarely aware of it, not as a background fact but as a physical presence, loud and insistent, pushing against the inside of her chest with each pump. Her hands were not shaking. She noted this with mild surprise and filed it. They passed through the kitchen. Garza was positioned near the back door with a weapon drawn. A compact man in his 40s who had been with the Vescari security detail for 8 years and who looked at Dominic when they came through with an expression of controlled readiness. "How many you got outside?" Dominic said. "I count 3 on the east approach based on what I heard. Nothing confirmed on the west. North is quiet." "North stays quiet. We're going through the garage." "I'll take the rear," Garza said. "You'll come with us," Dominic said. "I need bodies moving, not standing still." Garza moved. The door from the kitchen to the attached garage was a fire door, heavy, steel-framed. Evelyn went through first, then Dominic and Rourke, then Naomi. Carver behind her, Garza last, pulling the door shut behind him with the slow, controlled click of someone who understood that sound traveled and that the fire door, closed quietly, was buying them seconds. The garage held 3 vehicles, 2 black SUVs and a sedan that Evelyn used when she didn't want the SUVs. Naomi went straight to the far wall where the maintenance gate keypad was mounted. She had been in this garage 100 times, had walked past that keypad 100 times, had noted it the way she noted everything in the spaces she occupied, which was to say automatically and without deciding to. 6-digit code. She stood at the keypad and realized she didn't know it. Evelyn. She turned. Evelyn was already moving toward her. She reached past Naomi and entered the code without hesitating. Muscle memory. 30 years of it. The maintenance gate at the far end of the garage began to roll upward, slowly, with the mechanical patience of something that had never needed to move fast. From inside the house, through the fire door came a sound. Footsteps. More than one person. Moving through the kitchen with speed rather than caution, which meant they had either heard the garage door or given up on silence as a strategy. "Get in the vehicle," Dominic said. "Rourke can't drive," Naomi said. "Garza drives. Get in." She got in. The second SUV, the one with the keys already in the center console, Evelyn's vehicle, always ready, a habit from decades of needing to leave quickly. Garza was behind the wheel before the garage door had finished opening, Evelyn beside him, Dominic in the back with Rourke, one hand still bracing the older man upright, Carver in the far back, Naomi in the middle seat with the documents still pressed against her chest, which she was only now aware of because at some point in the last 4 minutes, she had apparently decided that the documents were leaving the house with her and had not put them down. The maintenance gate finished opening. Garza drove. He drove without lights for the first 50 meters, through the maintenance corridor, which was a narrow gravel track bordered by hedgerows on both sides, designed for utility vehicles and entirely too tight for anything pursuing them in a full-size vehicle at speed. The SUV's mirrors cleared the hedgerows by inches. Naomi gripped the door handle and did not make a sound. Behind them, light flooded the garage as the fire door came open. "Go," Dominic said. Garza turned the lights on and accelerated onto the North Service Road, which connected to a county road 200 meters ahead, and then they were on pavement and moving with the specific, purposeful speed of someone who knows where they're going. "Where?" Garza said. Dominic looked at Naomi. She understood why. Not because she was in charge, because the place they could go, the place that was secure, that had not been surveilled by anyone connected to Decker's network, that Sabrina Cross did not know about, was not one of Dominic's properties. It was hers. An apartment in Midtown that she had leased 18 months ago under her maiden name, a space she had never told Dominic about, a contingency she had constructed quietly and without justification, in the way that people who have spent years managing their own survival build exits they hope they won't need. She had never used it. She had paid for it every month and checked it every few weeks and not examined too closely what it said about her that she had it. "I know a place," she said, "but it took 40 minutes to reach the city. Rourke's wound was deep, but not arterial. Garza had field experience and confirmed this in the parking garage below the Midtown building, pressing clean cloth from the SUV's emergency kit against the entry point with the impersonal competence of someone following a procedure rather than improvising. Rourke sat against the SUV's rear tire and breathed with the controlled, slightly effortful rhythm of a man refusing to give his body permission to go into shock. "Hospital," Naomi said to Dominic. "Not yet." He knows his body," Dominic said. "He'll tell us." Rourke looked up. "Not yet," he confirmed, in a voice that brooked no further conversation on the subject. She let it go. She had learned to choose her battles in this world, and a man who had fought his way back through a compromised property with a wound in his side had probably earned the right to make decisions about his own medical timeline. The apartment was on the 21st floor, clean, spare, nothing personal. A bed, a desk, a kitchen she had stocked with basics, a second room she used as a workspace on the 3 or 4 occasions she had been here. She had chosen it for the building's secondary stairwells and its multiple entry points, which told her something about the state of her mind 18 months ago, and which now meant that Garza could establish a workable 3-point entry monitoring system without covering every angle himself. Dominic walked through the space without commenting on it. She watched him take in the desk, the organized workspace, the lack of anything that indicated this was a temporary bolt hole rather than a maintained, deliberate second life, and she watched him not say anything about it, which was its own form of conversation. Carver set up his equipment on the desk. He had brought his laptop and an encrypted portable router from a bag she hadn't realized he was carrying until they were in the garage. the habit of a man who expected to need to work from wherever he ended up. Within 20 minutes, he had a connection and was back inside the financial records. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table and made calls from a phone that Garza had produced from somewhere in the SUV. A clean phone, unused, the kind kept in a vehicle's emergency kit for exactly this reason. She made 4 calls in 20 minutes, short and precise, and when she finished, she looked at Dominic and said, "I have 3 men we can trust. Absolutely. Not connected to any of the existing network." 3, he said. 3, she said. And the way she said it told him that 3 was the number she was certain of, and that certainty, in the current situation, was worth more than a larger number she couldn't verify. Naomi stood at the window and looked at the city, Midtown Manhattan at midnight, which was not quiet and was not dark, which was the permanent amber and neon twilight that the city sustained regardless of the hour. And she thought about the summit. 4 days, 3.5 now. They had been moved out of the house. They had been separated from their security network. They had been stripped of the planning advantage that Naomi's document work had represented, because that advantage had been constructed to be found, which meant it was worse than no advantage. It was a picture of the threat designed to make them look the wrong direction. She turned from the window. "We've been running their playbook," she said. Dominic looked at her. So did Evelyn. "Everything I've done for the last 2 days, the documents, the account mapping, building the case around Holt and Sabrina, that's the investigation they wanted me to run. They fed it through Decker, they gave Evelyn just enough to make it credible, and they let me do the work of assembling it into something Dominic would believe." She moved away from the window. "The value of that for them is not just that it pointed us at the wrong target, it's that it consumed our time. We spent 2 days building a picture of the threat. We should have spent 2 days building a response." "We still have the documents," Carver said from the desk. "The underlying financial structure is real, even if our access to it was managed." "I know. That's what I'm working with." She came to the desk and stood behind him. "Pull the summit logistics. Everything you have, location, attendees, timing, security arrangements." Carver navigated to the file. The summit was scheduled for a warehouse facility in Red Hook that had been used for previous interfamily negotiations, an industrial space that provided a neutral, non-institutional setting with controllable access points. It was scheduled for 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 days from now. The confirmed attendees were Dominic and 2 members of his core team, Vincent Carano and 2 of his Sal Mantovani's eldest son representing the Mantovani interests, and 2 representatives from the Reyes organization in Jersey, 10 people in a room. "Who arranges security for the summit location?" Naomi said. Carver checked. "Shared responsibility. Each family provides their own personal security, external to the building. The building security itself was arranged by—" He stopped. "Holt," Dominic said from behind her. He had come to the desk. Carver confirmed it with a nod. Raymond Holt had arranged the security for the location where the summit was taking place, which meant he had full access to the building's entry points, security camera placement, and emergency protocols. He had, in effect, designed the room they were walking into. "They're not going to wait for the summit," Naomi said. Something was assembling itself in her mind. The timeline, the acceleration, the attack on the house tonight. Tonight was supposed to change the situation. When they came through the gate, they were trying to resolve this before the summit, not at it. The summit is a contingency. The preferred option was tonight. "Why?" Dominic said. "Because a disappearance is cleaner than an assassination in a room full of witnesses." She looked at him. "If we'd been in the basement or contained somewhere on the property, if we'd simply gone missing tonight, the summit would proceed without you. Carano takes the vacuum. The Reyes group falls in line. Mantovani, without you as a counterweight, has no choice but to accept the new structure." Dominic's face was doing something behind the controlled surface. She could see it trying to get through. "But we're not missing," he said. "No," she said, "which means they shift to the summit plan, and they move the timeline." She looked at Carver. "How quickly can you get me the real summit attendee list? Not the confirmed list, the actual room. Everyone Holt knows is coming." Carver looked uncertain. "That requires access to Holt's communication records." "Can you get it?" A pause. "It'll take time." "How much time?" He looked at his screen. If I work through the night, maybe by morning, maybe. Work through the night, she said. She turned to find Dominic directly behind her, closer than she'd expected, with an expression on his face she had seen very rarely in 11 years. Not controlled, not managed, not the face of the man who ran rooms and ended conversations with a word. The face of a man who was looking at something that surprised him and had not yet decided what to do with the surprise. You've been prepared for this, he said. Not for tonight specifically, but for something like this. She met his gaze. Yes. The apartment. Yes. How long? She thought about the honest answer and gave it. Long enough that I don't want to examine it too closely right now. He held her gaze for a moment. She didn't look away. There was no version of this conversation that wasn't uncomfortable, and she had moved past the instinct to manage his discomfort about her own choices sometime in the last 12 hours. He nodded. Once. The nod of a man who is accepting information he cannot immediately process and choosing to function anyway. What do you need from me? He said, for the third time tonight. The summit has to happen, she said. We can't cancel it. If we cancel, we signal that we're compromised, and we give up the only moment where we have a chance to see the complete picture in one room. Everyone who's part of this will be there. Every piece of the conspiracy that we still don't know, because we don't know all of it, we're still working with the version they wanted us to have. It'll be visible in that room if we know what to look for. You want to walk into the room they built. I want to walk into the room they built and not be what they expect to find there. He was quiet for a moment. Behind him, Evelyn was listening from the kitchen table with her hands folded and her face doing nothing readable. Sabrina will be there, Dominic said. Sabrina will find a way to be there, Naomi corrected. She's not a listed attendee, but she'll be there, in some capacity. She's been managing this too closely to hand it off for the final execution. Then she needs to believe between now and then that nothing has changed. Yes. She needs to believe you're still hers, that I'm neutralized, that the attack on the house tonight achieved its secondary objective even if we got out. It rattled us. It destabilized us. It put us on the defensive. You want me to call her again? In the morning, when she'd expect to hear from you. Not tonight. Tonight you're supposed to be shaken. She paused. Be shaken. Give her what she expects. You're not a man who's organizing a countermove. You're a man whose house was just attacked, whose security is compromised, who needs her to tell him everything is going to be fine. His jaw moved. I've never asked anyone to tell me things are going to be fine. She doesn't know that, Naomi said. She knows the version of you that she built, the one she's been managing. Be that version for 3 more days. He looked at her for a long time. And the summit, he said. We walk in there knowing the room is designed to kill me. What changes between now and then that makes that survivable? We stop running their playbook, she said. We build ours. She put the documents on the desk, the ones she'd carried out of the house, the ones she hadn't put down through the garage, and the maintenance road, and 40 minutes of midnight highway. And she spread them on the surface beside Carver's laptop, and she stood over them with the particular quality of attention that came, she had learned about herself, not from calm, but from the place just past the outer edge of fear where things went very clear and very fast. Start here, she said. The endpoints we didn't recognize, the ones Evelyn couldn't identify. I want to know who's at the far end of every one of those routing numbers before Carver gives me the attendee list, because I think when we compare those 2 documents, we're going to find the same names. Carver started typing. Dominic sat in the chair at the corner of the desk, not at the head of it, not in the position of someone running the room, but at the side of it, present and quiet, in the posture of a man who has decided to be useful in whatever way he is needed rather than in the way he is accustomed to. She noticed. She didn't say anything about it. She kept working. At 3:40 in the morning, Carver made a sound that was not quite a word. Naomi looked up from the documents she'd been cross-referencing. What? He turned the laptop toward her. He had accessed an intermediate communication record, not Holt's direct correspondence, but a shared scheduling system used by the summit's logistical coordinator, a layer of bureaucratic infrastructure that had not been encrypted with the same rigor as the financial records because no one had apparently considered it sensitive. In it was a confirmed attendance note added 6 days ago by an account registered to the logistics coordinator. It listed, in addition to the 10 official attendees, a security liaison. The name was Marcus Webb. Naomi stared at it. Marcus Webb, whom she had asked Dominic to remove from the house tonight. Marcus Webb, whose signature appeared on 3 intermediate accounts. Marcus Webb, who had left without argument when Dominic asked him to go. Not because he was innocent and understood, but because he had somewhere to be, someone to report to, and the departure had suited him as well as it had suited them. Marcus Webb was not an ambiguous figure in the account records. He was not a man whose signature might have been appropriated or forged. He was a listed security liaison for a summit that Holt had organized, and that was designed to end Dominic Viscari's life. He had been in the study tonight. He had been in the room with the documents. He had heard everything up to the point she sent him to the kitchen, which meant he had heard enough. He knew they were compromised. He knew they had fled the house. He knew, within a margin of error that was not large, what Naomi had assembled and what she knew. And he had been Dominic's closest advisor for 14 years. She turned to Dominic. He was already looking at the screen. He had read it at the same moment she did, and she watched his face move through something that had no clean name. Not shock, not grief, not rage, but some compound of all three that passed through his features like weather, and left behind it a stillness that was not peace. "Dom," she said. He said nothing. He looked at Marcus Webb's name on the screen, and he said nothing for a long time. And she let him have the silence because she understood, without needing to examine it, that there are some things a person has to absorb at their own pace regardless of how little time is available. Then he looked up. His eyes found hers across the desk. "Tell me what you need," he said. His voice was steady. It had the steadiness of something that has been stripped down to its structural minimum. All the habitual surfaces burned off, nothing left but the thing underneath that was either going to hold or wasn't. She told him. And somewhere across the city, in a hotel suite that Naomi would have been able to identify if she'd had 30 more minutes with the account records, Sabrina Cross sat with her phone in her hand and waited for the call she was expecting from Raymond Holt. And when it came, she listened for 40 seconds and then said, very quietly, "Then we move it up. 2 days." 2 days. Naomi had 43 hours. She did not sleep. There was a bed in the apartment's second room, and she was aware of it the way you are aware of something you have decided is not for you. Present, noted, set aside. She worked at the desk while the city outside the window moved through its nocturnal rhythms and then its early morning ones, the amber dark giving way incrementally to the gray that preceded actual light. And she cross-referenced account endpoints against the summit logistics until the pattern she had been looking for became visible at 5:12 in the morning with the specific, almost physical quality of something clicking into place. 7 names. 7 attendees or affiliates connected to the summit who appeared under various corporate structures and layered identities at the endpoints of Sabrina's financial architecture. Not 10. Not the entire room. 7. Which meant 3 people in that room were either clean or uninvolved or operating under a different arrangement she hadn't mapped yet. Mantovani's son was not among the 7. She stared at that for a long time. Then she woke Dominic. He had not slept either, or had slept in the way of men trained for operational stress, which was a kind of suspended readiness that looked like sleep from the outside and probably wasn't. He came fully alert when she touched his shoulder. No transition, no groggy margins. She showed him the list. He read it. His face was controlled now in a different way than it had been before. Not the habitual management of a man maintaining authority, but the controlled face of someone who has already processed his grief and his rage in private and arrived at the functional end of it. The face of someone who is done feeling things about the situation and has moved into the territory of deciding what to do about it. "Sal's boy," he said. "Not on the list." He was quiet for a moment. "He's 26 years old." "I know." "He doesn't know what room he's walking into." "No," she said, "and we need him to not walk into it." Dominic looked at her. "You want to warn him?" "I want to use him," she said, which was more honest and which she could see he respected more than a softer framing would have been. "He's clean. He's representing a major family. If he walks into that room believing the summit is legitimate and something goes wrong, his family declares war on whoever's responsible. Carano knows that. Holt knows it. Which means whatever they're planning, it accounts for Sal's son either being neutralized separately or being converted into a witness to a version of events that supports their narrative. So we get to him first. We get to him first, she said, and we tell him enough to make him useful without telling him so much that he panics and pulls out entirely. Dominic nodded. He reached for the clean phone. Not you, she said. He stopped. If you contact him directly, it signals that you know something is wrong. If you're compromised, if Sabrina is watching your communications at any level, that contact gets back to Holt and they accelerate further. She paused. Evelyn. They both looked at the kitchen, where Evelyn had fallen asleep upright in her chair, with her hands folded on the table and her posture maintaining its dignity even in unconsciousness. She has a relationship with Sal Sr., Naomi said, a genuine one, going back 15 years. A call from her to Sal's son, framed as a personal check-in before the summit, won't register as anomalous. Dominic looked at his mother for a moment. Then he walked to the kitchen and put his hand on her shoulder and woke her the same way Naomi had woken him, cleanly, without preamble, and said, "We need you." Evelyn opened her eyes and was immediately, completely present. "Tell me," she said. The summit location was a converted warehouse in Red Hook, 3 stories, loading dock access on the south face, 3 entry points that Holt had documented in the logistics file, and at least 2 that he hadn't, a roof access stairwell and a utility corridor on the east side that connected to the adjacent building's maintenance infrastructure. Carver had found both in the building's original architectural filings, which were public record, and which Holt had apparently not thought to consult or had chosen to ignore, and this omission was either careless or deliberate. And Naomi had decided it didn't matter which because the result was the same. They had 2 ways in that Holt didn't know about. Evelyn reached Sal Mantovani Jr. by phone at 9 in the morning. The call lasted 11 minutes. Naomi listened from across the room and tracked the shape of it from Evelyn's side. The initial warmth, the gradual pivot, the specific and careful amount of information delivered in the specific and careful order that Evelyn chose, which was not the order Naomi would have chosen, but which was, she acknowledged, calibrated for an audience she knew better than Naomi did. When Evelyn ended the call, she set the phone on the table and looked at Dominic. "He'll be there," she said. "He understands enough. He'll follow our lead inside the room." "He's not going to spook," Dominic said. "He's Sal's son," Evelyn said, which was the entirety of her assessment of his steadiness. Marcus Webb called Dominic at 10:47. Dominic looked at the phone. He looked at Naomi. She nodded, once. He answered, "Dom." Marcus's voice, through the speaker, was exactly what it always was. Measured, slightly warm, the voice of a man who had spent 14 years being the person Dominic trusted. "I heard about the house. Are you and Evelyn safe?" "We're fine," Dominic said. His voice was even. Not warm. Dominic's warmth with Marcus was habitual, present in every normal conversation, and the absence of it was a degree of performance she hadn't known he was capable of. "Shaken up. We got out. Where are you?" "Handling it," Dominic said. "I'll brief you before the summit." A pause. Brief, managed, but there. "You're still going to the summit." "It's business," Dominic said. "I don't cancel business because someone rattles my windows." Another pause, longer. "Of course, right." Something in the voice shifted. Not obviously, not in a way that would have been readable to anyone who hadn't been listening for it. "I'll see you there." Dominic ended the call. He set the phone down on the desk with the care of someone setting down something they'd like to throw. Naomi said nothing. Garza, near the window, said nothing. Rourke, on the couch, with his wound dressed and his color better than it had been 6 hours ago, said nothing. The room held the particular silence of people who have all just heard the same thing and are all separately processing what it costs. 14 years, Dominic said, to no one, to the room. Nobody answered him because there was no answer. There was only the fact. He sat with it for approximately 30 seconds. Then he looked at Naomi. "What time do we move?" Gone. They arrived at the Red Hook warehouse at 2:17 in the afternoon. Not through the front, not through the loading dock, through the utility corridor on the east side, which Garza had accessed via the adjacent building's maintenance entrance, using a key that Carver had arranged through a property management contact who asked no questions because Carver had chosen him specifically for that quality. The utility corridor was low-ceilinged and smelled of rust and standing water, and it connected to the warehouse's east interior through a fire door that had not appeared on Holt's security plan, and that was not, therefore, being watched. Naomi, Dominic, Garza, and Evelyn's 3 trusted men, 6 people, against whatever was in the main room. Rourke had argued, from the couch, that he was coming. Dominic had told him no with a finality that didn't invite revision. Rourke had looked at Naomi. She had looked back at him and said, "Monitor the communications. If we're not out in 90 minutes, you call Sal Sr. directly." He'd accepted that because it was a function, and Rourke understood function over feeling. Carver was on an encrypted line, running surveillance from the Midtown apartment. He had eyes on 3 of the building's external cameras through a breach in the security network that had taken him most of the night to construct, and that he could maintain for approximately 4 hours before the system detected it. The fire door from the utility corridor opened onto the warehouse's ground floor. An open industrial space, concrete, high ceilings, the residue of whatever manufacturing had happened here 30 years ago, now reduced to stained floors and rusted anchor points in the ceiling. The summit was set up on the second floor, in a partitioned meeting space that occupied the north half of the building. The staircase to it was visible from where they entered. A metal stair, open construction, not covered from below. Naomi could hear voices. Not words. Register. The ambient sound of a meeting in progress. Multiple speakers, the specific flat acoustic of concrete, and high ceilings eating the edges off everything. They were early, deliberately. The summit had been called for 3 o'clock, and arrivals were typically 5 to 10 minutes ahead, which meant the people already in the room were the people who had arrived early on purpose. And the people who arrived early on purpose at a meeting like this were the people running it. She looked at Dominic. He looked at the staircase. She took his arm. She didn't take his hand. This was not a comfort gesture. It was a positioning gesture. The physical form of what she needed to say, which was, not yet, not fast, deliberate. He understood. She had learned in the last 48 hours that the communication between them had shifted to something that required fewer words than it used to. She wasn't sure what to do with that yet, and this was not the moment to examine it. Garza and one of Evelyn's men took the ground floor perimeter. 2 men on the staircase approach. Naomi and Dominic moved toward the stairs. She could hear the voices more clearly now. 2 of them, primary. She identified one as Holt. She had heard him speak at enough functions to have his cadence filed. The other she didn't immediately place, and then she did, and the identification stopped her on the 3rd step. Sabrina. Not in the room above, not in the meeting space. On a phone, the voice coming from a door on the landing that was slightly ajar. A side room. A prep space. Something adjacent to the main meeting area. Sabrina was in the side room with Holt and they were talking, and from the 3rd step of the metal staircase, Naomi could hear enough. She heard, "Marcus confirmed they're coming. Dom doesn't know about Webb." She heard, "The Mantovani kid is the problem." She heard Holt say something she couldn't parse, and then Sabrina's voice again, lower, and the word after used in a context that needed no additional words to complete. Dominic had heard it too. She felt his arm go rigid under her hand and she tightened her grip. Not restraint, she could not physically restrain him, but the message was in the pressure. She needed 5 more seconds of information before anything moved. She got 3. The main meeting room door opened above them and Marcus Webb came through it and stopped at the top of the stairs and looked down and saw them. The moment held. 4 people in a staircase and the specific suspended quality of a situation that is reached the instant before it breaks. Marcus looked at Dominic. Dominic looked at Marcus. 14 years between them in 3 seconds of silence. Then Naomi let go of Dominic's arm and moved past him up the stairs. and she did it with the calm, purposeful movement of someone who has decided that the moment of suspension is over and something else is beginning. And she said to Marcus Webb, clearly, in the voice she used when there was no version of the sentence she was not prepared to complete, "Step aside." Marcus did not step aside. He stood at the top of the stairs with his hand inside his jacket, not drawing, not yet, but the hand inside the jacket, and his face doing something she could not categorize, something that had grief in it alongside everything else, which surprised her and which she did not have time to examine. "Naomi," he said, "don't. Step aside, Marcus." "You don't understand what's—" "I understand all of it," she said. She was 4 steps below him, 3. "I understand the accounts and the summit and what Holt arranged and what Sabrina was promised and what you were promised. I have the documentation, all of it. It's not here. It's somewhere you can't reach it, with people who know what to do with it if we don't walk out of this building." She stopped 2 steps below him. She looked up at him. "The only question is whether you step aside." His face worked. The hand inside the jacket did not move. "Marcus." Dominic's voice from below her, not loud, not with the authority register he typically used, but with something quieter and more final. "Whatever they told you it would look like on the other side of this. It doesn't look like that." Silence. The hand came out of the jacket. Empty. Marcus Webb stepped to the side of the landing, pressing himself against the wall, and he looked at Dominic as he passed, and something moved between them that was not forgiveness and was not hatred, but was the weight of 14 years being set down, and neither of them spoke. Naomi pushed the side room door open. Sabrina Cross turned from the window. Holt turned from the table. For one instant, the 4 of them occupied the same 12 square feet of space in a converted warehouse in Red Hook, and the instant had the particular quality of things that have been in motion for a long time arriving simultaneously at the same point. Holt moved first. He moved toward the table, toward something on the table, a phone, a weapon, something. And Garza came through the door behind Naomi, and the movement stopped. Sabrina did not move at all. She stood by the window in a gray blazer with her arms at her sides, and looked at Naomi with an expression that was, to Naomi's genuine surprise, not fear and not calculation, but something that looked, from a certain angle, like the particular exhaustion of someone who has been performing a very demanding role for a very long time and has just been released from it. "How much do you have?" Sabrina said. "Enough," Naomi said. Sabrina looked at Dominic. Something passed across her face. Not what Naomi had expected, not the proprietary intimacy she had deployed in the ballroom. This was something more complicated and less performed. "I want you to know," she said, and then she stopped, and she looked at the floor, and she did not finish the sentence. "Don't," Dominic said. His voice was flat and clean and contained nothing she could wound. Sabrina closed her mouth. From the main meeting room came the sound of voices changing register. Awareness that something was wrong, the specific shift in a room's sound when people in it start to understand that the situation is not what they were told it was. Naomi crossed to the connecting door and opened it. 7 men in the room. Carano, his 2 people. 3 men she didn't know from the Reyes organization. And Sal Mantovani Jr., 26 years old, standing near the far wall with his hands at his sides and his face carrying the controlled, careful expression of someone who has been briefed to stay calm and is working hard at it. He met Naomi's eyes across the room. She gave him a small nod. He held himself still. Carano looked at her, then passed her at Dominic, then at Garza. He ran the calculation. She could see him run it, could watch the assessment move through his face. And she watched him arrive at the end of it and understand that the calculation had already been run by someone else before he got here, and that he was inside the result of it rather than ahead of it. "Vincent," Dominic said. He came through the door and stood in the room and looked at Carano the way men in their world looked at each other when the performance was finished and only the fact remained. "Raymond Holt." Carano said nothing. "I want to know how far it goes," Dominic said. "And I want to know now, in this room, in front of these people, because in approximately 20 minutes, There are going to be other people here who you will not want to be having this conversation in front of." Carano looked at him for a long moment. He was 62 years old, gray and weathered and careful, a man who had survived 40 years in this life through the very caution that had apparently, at some point, not been enough. "Holt came to me 18 months ago," Carano said. His voice was even. "With a proposal. You could have told me." "I know." "You didn't." "No." A pause. "I didn't." Dominic held his gaze. Naomi watched Dominic hold it, watched him take the full measure of what Carano was telling him, which was not just that he had participated, but that he had participated with open eyes and made a choice, and that the choice had been about what he believed the future of the organization looked like, and who he thought would be standing at the center of it. It was a betrayal with reasons, which was both worse and more human than a betrayal without them. "Your man Holt," Dominic said, "is in the other room." Carano absorbed that. "The woman?" he said. "Also in the other room." Another pause. "What happens now?" "That depends," Dominic said, "on what you do in the next 60 seconds. What Carano did in the next 60 seconds was tell Dominic everything. He did it in the flat, itemized way of a man who has decided that the math has changed and that the most viable path forward is the one where he is the person who disclosed rather than the person who was exposed. He told him the names. 2 of the 3 Reyes representatives were part of it. The third was not. He told him the operational plan, which had been revised when the house attack failed. Not an assassination at the summit, but a vote. A formal interfamily motion to remove Dominic from his position, backed by enough votes and enough documentation of manufactured failures that the removal would appear procedurally legitimate. Holt had the documentation ready. Sabrina had spent 14 months building it. Marcus Webb had been supposed to deliver Dominic's proxy signature, obtained, they had believed, through Dominic's trust in his consigliere. The signature that would have appeared to end the Viscari Empire from the inside, with Dominic's own hand on it. Naomi stood in the doorway between the 2 rooms and listened and understood the full architecture of it for the first time. Not the fragments she'd been assembling, not the managed picture Decker had constructed, but the real thing, and it was more sophisticated and more patient and more brutal than she had given it credit for. And she felt, standing there, a cold and retrospective fear that had nothing to do with the present moment and everything to do with how close it had been. How close it still was, except that they were here, and the room was contained, and Sal Mantovani Jr. was watching from the far wall with the focused, steady attention of a young man understanding something important about the world he had been born into. Dominic's 3 men arrived at 2:58. They came through the front entrance, the official entrance, the one Holt had controlled, which no longer mattered because the people who had been stationed at it by Holt's arrangement had received, in the last 20 minutes, a set of instructions from Garza that had redirected them to irrelevance. The 3 men came up the stairs and into the main room, and the summit, such as it was, became something else entirely. It lasted another 2 hours. Not with violence. The violence had happened the night before, on a Westchester property, and it had not achieved what it was supposed to achieve, and the men in this room were not, in the end, the kind who doubled down on a failed strategy when the failure was complete and visible. What happened in those 2 hours was an accounting, methodical, witnessed, documented by Carver, who had been patched in by phone and was recording everything in the encrypted archive that lived in a server location that Naomi had chosen and that she was the only person in the room who knew. Holt said very little. He sat in the side room with Garza and said almost nothing, which was the intelligent choice, and which told her that however the rest of his calculation had gone wrong, his assessment of the current situation was accurate. Sabrina said nothing at all. She sat by the window where Naomi had found her, and she looked at the glass, and whatever was moving behind her face stayed behind it. And when it was time to leave the building, she stood and went where she was directed and did not look at Dominic again. The weeks after the warehouse had a quality that Naomi had not anticipated, which was slowness. She had been moving at a particular speed for so long, for longer than the 48 hours of the crisis, for years of measured, careful, high-stakes management of her own position in a world that was not built for her, that the deceleration felt almost physical. like the aftermath of running. The body still expecting emergency, and the emergency declining to arrive. The legal machinery moved in the directions it was pointed, not public prosecution. That was not how the world worked, and she had never expected it to. But the financial documentation went to the people it needed to go to, through channels that Carver understood and that produced, over the following months, the quiet dismantling of the subsidiary architecture that had been built over 14 months. Accounts closed, assets recovered, the shell structures dissolved. Raymond Holt disappeared from New York. She did not know where he went and made a deliberate decision not to find out, which was its own form of answer. Marcus Webb came to the Westchester house 3 weeks after the warehouse. Dominic met him at the door. Naomi stood in the hallway behind Dominic, not hidden, not performing anything, just present. Marcus looked at her once, and then at Dominic, and the three of them stood in the doorway for a moment in the October cold. "I want to explain," Marcus said. "I know," Dominic said. "I don't think it's enough," Marcus said. "The explanation. I know it isn't enough." "No," Dominic said. "It isn't." Marcus nodded. He had the look of a man who had made his peace with that before he came, which was the most honest version of him she had ever seen. "I wanted you to hear it anyway." Dominic stepped back from the door. Not an invitation, not warmth, not restoration, but not a closed door, an opening of enough space for a man to say what he needed to say, which was a form of grace that she had not expected from Dominic Viscari and which she did not comment on. Marcus came inside. He sat at the kitchen table and talked for an hour. She made coffee and set it in front of him without sitting down herself, and she listened from the doorway, and when it was done, she understood the shape of his reasons. Not forgivable, not forgotten, but human in the specific, unglamorous way of human failures that come from accumulated pressure and diminishing belief in the thing you've given your life to. He had not believed the Viscari organization would survive Dominic's decisions. He had bet on what he thought was the future. He had been wrong about almost everything, including, she thought, the quality of the man he'd stopped believing in. He left without resolution. There was no resolution to offer him. He seemed to understand that, and he left anyway, which was all there was. Dominic signed the transfer documents in January, not under duress, not because anyone required it. He did it at the desk in the Westchester study, the same desk where Naomi had spread the documents on the night that changed everything. And the transfers moved significant portions of the Viscari operational interests into a legitimate international security and logistics structure that had been built quietly over 3 months by a team of lawyers and accountants working under Evelyn's direction. It was not clean. Nothing in a life like this was ever completely clean. The history did not disappear because the structure changed. The people who had been hurt did not become unhurt, but the businesses that had operated in the dark were moved, one by one, into the light. And the ones that could not survive the light were closed, and the families that those operations had supported were compensated in ways that were real and documented and did not require anyone's silence. Naomi oversaw the compensation structure. It took 4 months, and it was the most detailed and demanding work she had done in her life, and she did it with the same focused, slightly dissociated precision she brought to everything, except that it was not dissociated, actually. She was entirely present for it, entirely connected to what it was and why it mattered. And the difference between that and the managed distance she had maintained for 11 years was something she noticed without being certain when it had changed. She and Dominic did not fix their marriage in a moment. There was no moment. There was a series of days, then weeks, then months, in which two people who had been performing adjacent to each other for 11 years tried, with varying degrees of success, to figure out what it looked like to be honest with each other instead. It was not comfortable. Honesty between people with their history and their damage was not comfortable. There were conversations that ended badly and had to be picked up the next day and ended better. And there were things said that could not be unsaid and had to be incorporated rather than erased. And there were mornings when the distance between them in the same room was large and mornings when it was not. She did not move out. She did not forgive quickly or perform forgiveness at all. She asked for what she needed and received it with a surprise she tried not to let show, and she gave what she decided to give rather than what she thought she was supposed to, and the distinction was quiet and continuous and more significant than any single gesture. The Midtown apartment she kept for another 3 months and then let the lease expire. She told Dominic about it when she let it go, not before. He didn't say anything for a moment, and then he said, 18 months. And she said yes, and he nodded, and they sat in a kitchen in Westchester with their coffee and the October light that came through the east window in the mornings, and said nothing else about it, which was its own kind of conversation. Evelyn died in March, 9 months after the warehouse. Not violently, not suddenly. She had known since August, had known before any of it, before the gala, before she took Naomi's arm on the ballroom landing and walked her into a study and put documents on a table, and had said nothing about it because saying something about it would have required everyone around her to spend their energy on her dying instead of on the things that needed to be done. And Evelyn Vescari had never in her life been willing to let her own needs consume the room. Naomi found out in September when she went looking for something in Evelyn's desk and found a medical file that was not hidden, exactly, but not displayed either, filed in the bottom drawer under correspondence, the way Evelyn filed everything she considered handled. She sat with the file for a long time. Then she put it back exactly as she had found it and did not say anything to Dominic and did not bring it up with Evelyn for 3 weeks, until one evening in the Westchester sitting room when the two of them were alone and Evelyn looked up from her reading and said without preamble, "You found the file." "Yes," Naomi said. Evelyn went back to her reading. "Good," she said. "Then I don't have to explain it." What they did instead of explaining it was be in the same rooms together more. Not with ceremony, not with the performances of meaningful time. They had coffee in the mornings and worked in adjacent rooms in the afternoons, and occasionally, in the evenings, Evelyn told her things, stories mostly, about the years before Naomi, about the family and its various earlier forms, about decisions made and their costs, and the specific non-sentimental satisfaction of having built something that outlasted the conditions that required it to be built. She did not moralize. She did not deliver lessons. She described things with precision and let them be what they were. And Naomi listened the way she listened to everything, which was with the part of herself that she kept very quiet and very present at the same time. When Evelyn died, in the small room on the second floor of the Westchester house, it was 5 a.m. and Dominic was on one side of the bed and Naomi was on the other, and it was quiet, and there was nothing dramatic about it. And afterward, Dominic sat in the hallway outside the door for a very long time, and Naomi sat beside him and did not say anything and did not move away. The Vescari International Group had its first legitimate board meeting in April. Naomi sat at the table. Not at the head. That was Dominic's seat, and he had taken it with the specific quality of someone who understands the weight of a chair rather than its status. She sat to his left, which was where she had always been in the rooms that mattered, and which meant something different now than it had a year ago. Sal Mantovani Jr. was there, representing a formal partnership between the two families, the first legitimate cross-organizational business arrangement in either family's history. He was 26 years old, and he sat very straight and paid very close attention to everything. And twice during the meeting, he looked at Naomi when a question arose that nobody else at the table immediately knew how to answer, and both times she gave him the answer, and neither time did he appear surprised. After the meeting, he came to where she was gathering her papers and said simply, "Thank you for what you did in the warehouse." She looked at him. He had Sal Sr.'s eyes, dark, patient, the eyes of a man who was still deciding what kind of man he was going to be and was taking the decision seriously. "Don't waste it," she said. He smiled. It was a very young smile. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She walked out of the boardroom with her notes under her arm and the afternoon light coming through the east-facing windows at the angle that only happened in April, and Dominic fell into step beside her in the hallway, which he had begun doing in the months since January. Not escorting, not managing, simply moving in the same direction at the same pace, and she had stopped registering it as unusual somewhere around February. "How'd we do?" he said. "We did fine," she said. "Fine is not what I was hoping to hear." "Fine is accurate," she said. "We'll do better next quarter." He was quiet for a moment. Outside the windows, the city was doing what it always did, which was everything at once, and the late afternoon gave it a quality of almost accidental beauty. Naomi, he said. I know, she said. He looked at her. You don't know what I was going to say. No, she admitted, but I know the register. I know what register that is. He was quiet again. She had learned in the last year that his silences were not what she had spent 11 years interpreting them as. Not cold, not management, not the termination of conversations he had lost interest in. They were often simply the space before he said something he had not yet worked out how to say, and that he needed the silence to work it out in. I'm sorry, he said. For the gala. For all of it before the gala. For what it cost you. She listened to the sentence land. She listened to it with the honest, unmanaged part of herself that she had been allowing more access since last October. I know, she said. That's not enough, he said. I know that too, she said. It's where we start. They walked down the hallway together and through the lobby and out into the April air, and the city received them without ceremony, and there was no resolution in the sense of a thing resolved cleanly and put away. There was only what was true, that they were both still standing, that the thing they had built was still standing, that the woman who had walked out of a ballroom in a direction that was not the exit, but felt like one had arrived somewhere that could not have been predicted from that staircase landing. But that was, she understood, exactly where she had been walking toward. Not an ending. A place where things could grow that couldn't grow before. She had spent 11 years making rooms ready for other people. This one she was keeping.